Hello, I'm Beckett, and it's time for another unforgettable story. Queen Camila walked straight past the dignitaries, past her own aides, and stopped in front of the royal guard. "Salute your queen," she ordered, but the guard completely ignored her, didn't so much as even blink. And when she pushed harder in front of the whole courtyard, his reply didn't just stop her cold. It brought up a name she never expected to hear again. Now, before we show you exactly what happened, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to see will leave you speechless. The afternoon that would change everything began like any other ceremonial duty at Buckingham Palace. February air hung sharp and still over London, the kind of cold that cuts through wool coats and makes tourists huddle closer together behind the rope barriers. The sky was gray steel, heavy with the weight of winter and secrets that had been buried too long. The wind was sharp enough to make the Union Jack snap like whips against their poles, and tourists huddled together behind the rope barriers, phones already out, hoping to catch something worth posting. It wasn't a major state occasion, just a formal welcome for some diplomatic envoy. But even the smallest royal ceremonies draw crowds. There's something magnetic about watching tradition unfold with clockwork precision. When the history books are written about this day, they'll mark it as the moment when 27 years of silence finally broke. When one man's refusal to salute became an earthquake that shook the very foundations of the British monarchy. Staff Sergeant Adrien Cole stood at the eastern edge of the forecourt like he'd been carved from the same stone as the palace behind him. 41 years old, tall and lean beneath that imposing black bearskin that added another foot to his height. His scarlet tunic was pressed so sharp you could have cut paper on the creases, every brass button catching the pale light like tiny mirrors. But here's what the tourists snapping photos didn't know about the man in the ceremonial uniform. Cole had earned his stillness in places where moving at the wrong moment could get you killed. He'd stood checkpoint duty in Afghan, where the silence between heartbeats might be the only warning you got. He'd maintained position during mortar strikes in the Balkans, refusing to abandon his post until every civilian in his sector was clear. And there was something else the crowd couldn't know. In 1919, during his early service with the Household Division, Cole had been part of the discreet security detail assigned to Princess Diana during her final months. Not the obvious protection you'd see in photographs, but the kind that stayed in shadows, watching for threats that might come from unexpected directions. He'd been there the night she returned from that last trip to Paris, had seen the fear in her eyes that the newspapers never reported, had heard her quiet conversation with her private secretary about people who smile while they plan your disappearance. She'd pulled him aside that night, her voice barely above a whisper. "Adrien, if something happens to me, if there's an accident, or I suddenly decide to retreat from public life, remember that I never wanted to disappear. Remember that some people get what they want by making their competition vanish." Oh, he tried to reassure her, told her she was being paranoid. But Diana had just shaken her head. "I've spent years learning to trust my instincts about people who threaten you while smiling. Tonight, looking into certain eyes, I see someone who's been planning conversations like this for months." Her hands had been trembling as she spoke, Cole remembered. Not from cold, but from fear. "There are people in this family, Adrien, who see me as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. They've made it clear that my continued visibility is problematic for their future plans." She gripped his arm then, her fingernails digging in through his uniform sleeve. "Promise me something. If they succeed in silencing me, don't let them rewrite who I was. Don't let them turn me into a footnote in someone else's fairy tale." Cole had promised. A promise he'd kept locked away for 27 years, watching as Diana's memory was slowly sanitized, her inconvenient truths buried beneath official narratives and charitable platitudes. All until today, Cole had filed his concerns through proper channels. They'd been dismissed as overprotective speculation from junior staff, who don't understand the complexities of royal relationships. 3 weeks later, Diana was dead in a Paris tunnel. For 27 years, he'd carried that weight. Today, looking across the forecourt, he had the strangest feeling that weight was about to shift, the kind of discipline that looked ceremonial to outsiders. For Cole, it was muscle memory from places where discipline meant survival. His eyes were fixed on that invisible point somewhere past the crowd, the thousand-eye stare that guards are famous for. Only his wasn't for show. It was the same focus that had kept him alive through 2 tours of duty, where being distracted for even a second could mean not coming home. The motorcade glided through the palace gates with that smooth, practiced precision you only see with royal movements. Dark vehicles, tinted windows, police escorts that somehow managed to look both obvious and discreet. Palace staff moved into position with clipboards and practiced smiles, everyone knowing exactly where they needed to be. The central car came to a gentle stop. A liveried footman approached the rear door, glanced toward the senior protocol officer for the nod, then opened it with a flourish. Queen Camila stepped out. She wore a tailored navy coat with subtle fur trim at the collar. The kind of expensive simplicity that screams money without being flashy about it. Her hat was positioned at exactly the right angle, her hair neat beneath it, her expression that carefully practiced smile she'd worn to thousands of these events over the years. She moved through the small reception line like she was following choreography. A handshake here, a murmured pleasantry there, a polite nod to the diplomatic guests who had been waiting in the cold. At the rope barrier, she turned and gave a brief wave to the crowd, generating the expected ripple of cheers and camera clicks. Then her gaze swept across the line of ceremonial guards and stopped. Her eyes settled on Cole, standing motionless with his rifle held in perfect position, and something shifted in her expression. Not obviously, she was too practiced for that, but there was a tightening around her eyes, a pause that lasted just a beat too long, like she'd recognized something she hadn't expected to see or someone. Cole felt her stare, though his own never wavered from that distant point. 27 years was a long time, but some faces you don't forget, especially when they belong to people who'd made certain promises about what would happen to inconvenient witnesses. The planned route had her moving straight to the palace entrance after greeting the envoy. But halfway there, she did something that made every protocol officer in the forecourt tense up. She changed direction, not dramatically, just a subtle shift in her path that took her away from the reception line and toward the row of guards. Her aides, caught off guard, hurried to adjust their positions. A couple of palace officials exchanged quick glances. This wasn't on the schedule. The crowd noticed immediately. You could feel the shift in energy, that collective intake of breath that happens when people sense something unscripted is about to unfold. Phones that had been lowering rose again. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Camila walked directly to Cole and stopped in front of him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him beneath the bare skin. For a moment, neither moved. "I believe a queen is due a salute from her guard sergeant," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearest tourist to hear. Cole didn't blink, couldn't shift. The winter breeze ruffled the plume on his bare skin, but the man beneath it might as well have been made of granite. Her smile didn't waver, but something in her tone sharpened. "Perhaps you didn't hear me," I said. "Salute your queen." Still nothing. His breathing remained slow and even, eyes locked on that distant point that guards are trained to focus on. The rifle stayed steady in his left hand, his right hand resting in perfect ceremonial position. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is he allowed to just ignore her?" Another voice answered uncertainly, "I don't think so." Camilla's smile began to look forced. She leaned forward slightly, not enough to break protocol, but enough to make her words carry more weight. "This isn't the time to be stubborn, Sergeant. You're on duty. Do as I've instructed." The silence stretched and stretched until it became its own kind of answer. Behind her, an aide shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward one of the protocol officers as if asking whether they should intervene. The officer gave the slightest shake of his head. Sometimes you just had to let these moments play out. "A simple salute," Camila continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "That's all I've asked. Show the people that their queen is respected by her guard." The crowd was completely focused now. Even the dignitaries in the reception line had stopped pretending to make small talk, turning to watch the standoff unfolding in the forecourt. Cole remained absolutely motionless. Not defiant, that would have required emotion, just immovable, like he was anchored to something deeper than the cobblestones beneath his feet. And that's when Camila's patience finally cracked. She straightened to her full height, her voice now pitched for the entire courtyard to hear. Is this how the household division now conducts itself? Standing mute in the face of the crown. Some tourists lowered their phones, suddenly uncomfortable. Others raised them higher, sensing this was turning into something that might end up in tomorrow's headlines. I'm certain, she continued, each word crisp as the winter air, that ceremonial respect is not optional, unless, of course, we've reached the point where protocol means whatever suits the mood of the man in uniform. The aristocratic sharpness was coming through now, the kind of tone honed in drawing rooms where cutting someone down was an art form. Cole didn't move, not even a twitch. The stillness itself had weight to it, a presence that contrasted sharply with the rising heat in her voice. Near the rope barrier, people were starting to lean forward. This wasn't the polite ceremony they'd expected to watch. A few tourists looked genuinely uncomfortable, like they were witnessing a family argument in public. Others seemed riveted, phones steady in their hands. She tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. I have always respected men who do their duty. But there's a certain kind of man who hides behind rules because he lacks the character to act when respect is owed. That landed like a slap.
Not shouted, not crude, but precise, surgical. At the rope barrier, a middle-aged man in a navy coat muttered, "Bit much, isn't it?" His wife glanced at him but said nothing, though her expression suggested she agreed. An American tourist whispered to her companion, "Is she always like this?"
The answer came back quietly. This isn't normal. Behind Camila, her lead aide was checking his watch and glancing toward the palace entrance. Whatever was supposed to happen next on the schedule was being delayed by this standoff. Protocol officers were having whispered conversations, trying to decide if they should intervene. Camila's voice softened, but the edge remained razor sharp. You may think this is all feet first, Sergeant. Standing in the cold with a gun you'll never fire. But the monarchy runs on traditions like these, and you are here to uphold them, not rewrite them to suit yourself. Crowd's mood was shifting. What had started as curious amusement was becoming something else entirely. People looked uncomfortable now, like they were witnessing something they'd rather not see. Cole's rifle gleamed in the pale sunlight, its polished steel reflecting the gray sky above. His boots, polished to a mere shine, didn't move a fraction on the ancient cobblestones. A guard salutes the sovereign, Camila said, gesturing toward him with one gloved hand. A guard salutes those who stand for the sovereign. That is the law of this courtyard, and it has been so for centuries. A younger aide took half a step forward, lowering his voice. Mom, she didn't look at him. It's failure to acknowledge your queen, Sergeant, is failure to acknowledge the very crown you claim to serve. The temperature in the courtyard had shifted from formal to personal, from ceremonial to confrontational. This was no longer about protocol. It was about power, about who would blink first. She took a breath. Her next words delivered like a judge issuing a verdict. Protocol exists to honor the crown, not to serve the egos of men who think themselves above it. The line hung in the cold air, drawing murmurs from the crowd. A woman in a wool scarf whispered to her companion, "He's not going to move." And she was right. He didn't. The pause between them was long enough now that even the dignitaries had stopped pretending this wasn't happening. Every eye in the forecourt was focused on the space between the queen consort and the motionless guardsman. From somewhere in the diplomatic reception line, a French attaché murmured to his colleague, "This is not normal protocol. None." The response came back grimly. "Nothing about this is normal." Palace security personnel, positioned discreetly around the perimeter, began shifting their positions, not intervening, not yet, but preparing for whatever might come next. One of them spoke quietly into his radio, situation developing at ceremonial post monitoring. When Camila spoke again, her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Your behavior is an embarrassment to your regiment," she said, each word crisp as frost and an insult to the monarchy itself. "I will see to it you are removed from this post before the hour is out." At the rope barrier, a woman in her 60s stepped forward slightly, her voice clear enough for those around her to hear. "That man served with my son in Afghanistan. If he's not saluting, there's a reason." Another voice joined her. Some things matter more than protocol. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were taking sides. You could feel the shift in energy, the way public sentiment was crystallizing around the figure in red, who had said nothing.
but somehow spoke volumes. It was meant to be the final word, the kind of dismissal that ends arguments and sends people scurrying. Only this time, it wasn't the end. For the first time since she'd approached him, Cole moved slowly, deliberately. His right hand shifted on the rifle stock, drawing it up, but just enough to make a subtle ceremonial adjustment. Not breaking formation, not quite, but it was the first visible sign that he had heard every word she'd said. The crowd sensed the shift immediately. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the dignitaries in the background turned to watch. When he spoke, his voice carried across the courtyard, low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I serve the crown," he said without turning his head or breaking that forward stare. "I do not serve pretenders to it." The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp. A collective gasp from the crowd. Aides stiffened. Phones that had begun to lower shot back up. A woman near the front barrier put her hand to her chest. Someone else whispered, "Did he just call her pretender?" The lay of pretender. Camilla's head jerked back slightly, her composure cracking for the first time. "Excuse me." Cole's breathing remained steady, almost unnervingly so. When he continued, each word was delivered with the precision of a man who'd been waiting 27 years to say them. "My loyalty was and remains to Diana, Princess of Wales." Her name, spoken aloud in that courtyard, seemed to drop the temperature by several degrees. A ripple went through the crowd. Not just murmurs now, but distinct whispers of Diana passing from person to person. An older woman in the crowd wiped away a tear. A young man who'd been filming lowered his phone entirely, suddenly understanding this was about something bigger than a viral moment. Cole's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of something that had been held back for too long. She served with dignity. She served the people. She was the rightful Princess of Wales. Behind the rope barrier, you could hear people drawing sharp breaths. Someone whispered, "He's really doing this." Another voice, "Good for him." Camilla's gloved hands tightened at her sides, the only visible sign that his words had found their mark. He continued, each word measured and deliberate, spoken with the authority of someone who'd been there, who'd seen what others had only read about in sanitized press releases. "You took her place through deceit, and if not for you, she might still be alive." The reaction was instant and visceral. Audible gasps, sharp intakes of breath. A woman putting her hand to her mouth. Someone near the barrier said he knows something, but didn't finish the thought. Even the palace aides looked shaken. This wasn't just insubordination. This was testimony from someone who'd been inside the machine when it was destroying Diana. Camilla's carefully maintained composure cracked, not broken, but visibly strained. A muscle tightened along her jaw. The practiced smile was gone entirely, replaced by something cold and rigid. For several heartbeats, the only sound was the winter wind moving across the courtyard and the distant snap of flags. Cole's eyes never shifted from that point beyond the crowd. His voice returned to silence, his hands steady on the rifle. But the words he'd spoken hung in the space between them like smoke that wouldn't disperse. The confrontation had transformed from a test of protocol into something much more personal, much more dangerous. For several seconds that felt like minutes, Camila didn't move. Her aides stood frozen behind her, their expressions carefully neutral, despite the tension radiating from their posture. Every eye in the courtyard was fixed on the space between them. When she finally spoke, her tone was controlled, but ice cold. "I have earned my position, Sergeant," she said, voice pitched to carry without shouting. "And your personal sentiments about the late princess have no shame bearing on your obligations here. You are a soldier. Soldiers follow protocol." Cole did answer immediately. The pause was deliberate, the kind of silence that forces the other person to fill it while refusing to be rushed. When his voice came, it was almost conversational. "Protocol, Mom, is that guards salute the sovereign and those representing the sovereign in an official capacity." Whoa. He shifted his grip slightly, the tiniest adjustment, just enough to punctuate his words. Respect is built into the institution, but it is not granted automatically to the individual. Titles can be claimed. Loyalty is earned. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think your interpretation outweighs centuries of he cut across her smoothly, never raising his voice. I've stood on parade for monarchs who commanded respect without having to ask for it. For men and women who understood that the salute is more than a movement of the hand. It's a reflection of trust, of belief in the person standing in that place." He let the words settle for a heartbeat before continuing.
Trust mom is not demanded, and it is not owed to those who diminish the memory of those they replace. The effect on the crowd was electric. People who had been half smiling at the novelty of the moment straightened, phones lowered. A man in a long coat gave the smallest nod as if in agreement. Camila's eyes narrowed, but she didn't step closer. Her voice took on a brittle quality. You are out of line, Sergeant. There will be consequences for this. Cole's gaze remained fixed on that invisible horizon. Perhaps, but I'd rather face them than forget the oath I took. The statement didn't need volume to land hard. The quiet certainty made it more powerful than any shouted defiance could have been. For the first time since approaching him, Camila's eyes flickered away just for a moment, but long enough for the observers to catch it. And once that kind of moment is noticed, it can't be unseen. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was decisive. The conversation had already been settled, even if neither party would admit it aloud. Somewhere at the rope barrier, a woman murmured, "He's not budging." Another voice answered quietly, and she knows it. Camila exhaled slowly through her nose, then turned slightly toward her aides. One stepped forward immediately, murmuring something too quiet for the crowd to hear. She gave a sharp nod. Without another word to Cole, she pivoted on her heel and began walking toward the palace entrance. Her aides closed around her like a protective screen, part formality, part shield from the rows of staring eyes. No apology, no final order, no victory claimed, just a retreat, quiet but unmistakable. As she disappeared through the archway, one of the protocol officers was already on his radio speaking in urgent clipped tones. This wasn't going to stay contained to the forecourt. By evening, every news outlet in London would be making calls, trying to confirm what their sources were already whispering. A senior palace aide approached the remaining security personnel, his face grim. Full media blackout on today's events. No statements, no confirmations, no details released to anyone. But it was too late for damage control. In the crowd, people were already uploading videos to social media. The hashtag had remembered Diana was beginning to trend. Royal correspondents across the city were receiving anonymous tips about explosive revelations at the palace. Within hours, this moment would be analyzed by experts, dissected by historians, and debated by anyone who'd ever questioned the official story of Diana's death. Cole had done more than refuse a salute. He'd reopened wounds the establishment had spent decades trying to heal. For several seconds after she disappeared through the palace archway, no one moved. The courtyard held its breath, waiting to see if the guard, who had just held his ground, would acknowledge what had passed. He didn't. Staff Sergeant Adrien Cole resumed the exact stillness he'd maintained before she approached, rifle in perfect ceremonial position, eyes locked on that distant point. If you'd walked into the forecourt at that moment, you might have thought nothing unusual had happened at all, but everyone who'd witnessed it knew better. Near the rope barrier, the older woman was still wiping her eyes. The man beside her said quietly, "That's the first time anyone's spoken the truth about Diana in this place since she died." A teenager turned to her mother. "Mom, what did he mean about Diana being alive?" Her mother's answer was careful, but clear. He meant some people get what they want by making sure their competition disappears. Love? And not everyone who disappears chooses. The veteran with a regimental tie approached the barrier, addressing no one in particular, but speaking loud enough for several people to hear. "I served 32 years. I've seen good soldiers follow bad orders, and I've seen brave soldiers refuse to follow any orders at all." That man just showed us the difference between the two. A young woman with her phone still recording spoke to her camera. "I don't know what we just witnessed, but I know it mattered. That guard just risked his career to honor someone who's been gone for almost 30 years. That's not just duty, that's love." The murmurs began quietly. Tentative exchanges between people processing something they weren't sure they should discuss out loud. A man in a heavy overcoat said to no one in particular, "That's what real discipline looks like." A woman beside him nodded, still watching Cole. Takes courage to stand your ground like that. Phones were lowered slowly, almost reluctantly, as people realized the footage they captured wasn't just another viral moment. It felt weightier than that, more significant. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice said quietly, "Did he really say Diana's name?" The answer came just as softly, clear as day, and he meant every word. Two younger men who'd been whispering since the confrontation began exchanged a look, then gave the faintest nod toward Cole. Not enough to draw attention, but enough that he would have seen it if he'd been looking. He wasn't, couldn't be. An older gentleman near the center of the barrier straightened to attention and raised a small salute. It wasn't showy or performed for others' benefit, just a private gesture of respect. He held it for a moment, then let it fall. Cole didn't acknowledge it, bound by the demands of his role. But the gesture hung in the cold air between them, meaningful in its silence. As the other elements of the ceremony resumed, the crowd didn't disperse as quickly as usual. They lingered, eyes still drawn to the solitary figure in red and black who had said so little, yet somehow said everything that mattered. Some whispered theories about what would happen to him after this. Others wondered whether the moment would make the news or be quietly buried by palace communications staff. But the absence of Camila from the forecourt had shifted something fundamental. The space belonged to Cole again, and the stillness he projected filled it more completely than her presence ever had. By the time the last dignitary disappeared inside and the forecourt began to empty, the pale afternoon light was fading to silver. Evening was settling over London like a soft blanket. But something had changed in that courtyard. Word was already spreading beyond the rope barriers. The American tourists were posting to social media. The British visitors were calling friends and family. Within hours, every royal correspondent in the city would be working their sources, trying to confirm what sounded too explosive to be true. A plainclothed security officer approached from the side entrance, his destination clear. Not to arrest Cole, that would create an even bigger spectacle, but to quietly relieve him of duty before this moment could escalate further. Man's radio crackled with instructions. Discreet extraction, minimal visibility. Priority is containment. Cole saw him coming in his peripheral vision. In about 30 seconds, his moment of truth would be over. 27 years of silence broken by 2 minutes of spoken reality. He thought of Diana's voice that last night. Don't let them turn me into a footnote in someone else's fairy tale. Mission accomplished. The security officer was 10 feet away now. His approach noticed by several people in the crowd. A woman called out, "Don't you dare move him. He's the only one here telling the truth." Others joined her. "Leave him alone. He's done nothing wrong." Diana deserves to be remembered. For the first time in royal history, a crowd was actively defending a guard's right to break protocol. The security officer hesitated, looking back toward the palace for guidance. Sometimes the right action isn't the safe action. Cole knew what would come next. There would be disciplinary hearings, questions about his fitness for ceremonial duty, pressure to transfer him somewhere far from public view. His pension might be threatened, his service record questioned. But for the first time in 27 years, the weight he'd carried felt lighter. Diana's truth had been spoken where it mattered, in the place where she'd been erased from history by someone who'd been there when it happened. He remained exactly where he'd been since morning. Same perfect posture, same unwavering focus, same unshakable discipline. To anyone watching closely, it was the final lesson of the day. Authority might demand attention, but respect has to be earned. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to move. So, what do you think? Was Sergeant Cole right to refuse her demand for a salute? Should a royal guard ever break silence when provoked like this? Or does true discipline mean staying quiet no matter what's said? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and these conversations matter more than you might think. If this moment moved you, if it reminded you that real strength doesn't need to shout to be heard, hit that like button. It honestly helps more than you know. Make sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss our daily stories about the incredible men and women who guard these traditions. And if you know someone who could use a reminder that respect can't be demanded, only earned, share this video with them. There's another Royal Guard story already waiting for you on your screen. Click it now and we'll see you tomorrow with another moment that proves the same truth over and over again. Real authority doesn't demand recognition, it simply stands. And when it does, even the loudest voices discover they have nothing left